Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. Today we're going to dive into how drinking and sobriety affects our mental health. Many people believe that drinking can have positive effects on dealing with things like stress, depression, or anxiety, but does it really help, or is that just an excuse that we use to justify continuing to drink? And once we get sober, what is the best way to deal with the mental health challenges that we may be facing? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. Many people who turn to alcohol are doing so as a form of self-medication. Maybe they're trying to numb emotional pain, reduce anxiety, or cope with stress. And while it may seem like an effective tool, here's where things get complicated. While alcohol might provide short-term relief, it actually creates more mental health issues in the long term. Research consistently shows that alcohol is a depressant. This isn't just a term we throw around. It's a classification that describes how alcohol affects the brain's neurotransmitters. Heavy drinking is associated with increased risk for a range of mental health disorders, including anxiety and depression. The reason why alcohol has such a profound effect on our mental health lies in the way that it interacts with the brain's chemistry. When we drink, alcohol initially boosts the feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine, which explains why you might feel a bit of a high at first. However, as the body processes alcohol, dopamine levels crash and cortisol, which is the stress hormone, spikes. It is often why you see people who are drinking over a life event, like a breakup, initially feel good early in the evening and even begin to celebrate their newly found independence, only to end up a sobbing mess by the end of the night. They had that initial dopamine hit early in the evening, but were experiencing that crash by the night's end. For people who are already vulnerable to anxiety or depression, this cycle only gets worse over time, as we will see our overall mental health continue to decline with the more we continue to drink, which often requires more alcohol to treat, which leads to an even steeper decline in our mental health, which usually begins that downward spiral that most of us are very familiar with. So while alcohol or drugs may seem effective initially in dealing with various mental health issues, it is only a band-aid and not a realistic solution to treating mental health challenges that we may have. For long-term effectiveness, we must learn to address the problem on the inside rather than seeking solutions on the outside. One of the most profound shifts in sobriety is a mental clarity that people begin to experience. In the early days of sobriety, this could actually be challenging. After all, without the escape that alcohol provides, we're suddenly confronted with everything we are trying to avoid. But over time, as we gain the tools to cope, the clarity can be liberating. Research has found that individuals who abstain from alcohol show significant improvements in mental health markers within a year. These include improved mood, better sleep, and reduced anxiety. It's as if our minds are finally able to relax and reset without the constant up and down cycle that alcohol causes. This mental health clarity often extends beyond just feeling less foggy. For many, it means gaining deeper insights into their emotions, values, and what they truly want from life. Think of it like cleaning out a cluttered closet. Once you clear out all the unnecessary stuff, things like stress, anxiety, and mood swings, you're left with the things that matter. And the more you work on that, the more you could build a new foundation based on values that actually bring you happiness and fulfillment, not just chasing occasional moments of feel-good. Two of the most common mental health challenges people face are anxiety and depression, and both can be significantly affected by sobriety. Studies like the one conducted by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism indicate that alcohol disrupts the balance of chemicals in the brain associated with mood and stress, increasing our risk of anxiety and depression. Many people, myself included, used alcohol to treat social anxiety. I had always struggled with social anxiety growing up. Living in a constant state of anxiety anytime I had to socialize was incredibly painful. And then I discovered alcohol. The first time I got drunk was at a friend's birthday party. Her older brothers were drinking and offered me a beer, then a shot, and then I started drinking everything I could get my hands on. At some point in the evening, I mentioned to one of her older brothers that there was a girl there that I had a crush on since elementary school, and he looked at me and said, "Just go ask her out." Usually this would be something I could never do, but with a bit of prodding and some liquid courage, I could finally do what I could never even consider doing before. I walked right over, and after a little bit of small talk, I finally asked her out, and she shot me down. I remember going back over to where her brothers were sitting, telling them what happened, and we all just laughed about it. That singular moment was so powerful in my life. I was not only able to face my paralyzing fear of rejection, but when I ended up getting rejected, I was able to laugh about it moments later. A lifetime problem solved with just a few drinks. Now, the rest of the night didn't go as well. I ended up embarrassing myself by drinking way too much, being a massive distraction to the party, having a long puking session on the bathroom floor, and then having to find a way to quietly sneak back into my bedroom later that night without being caught by my mom while being so drunk I could barely walk. And then there was the next morning. The alcohol had worn off, and all the embarrassing moments from the night before started coming back to me. I thought about having to face everyone at school the next day, including the girl who shot me down. Any relief from my anxiety had been replaced by even more anxiety than I had before. But in the middle of all that new anxiety was still the memory of that one moment of liquid courage earlier in the evening, which began the thought that alcohol was the magic solution. And I rode that belief all the way to rehab 17 years later. It was that powerful. But with the years of using alcohol as a crutch, my actual ability to socialize started to get worse because my brain started to become reliant on alcohol to deal with this emotion. This is a process in our brains called neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to rewire itself. While it is effective for learning skills and performing routine tasks with less effort, it is also one of the reasons that regularly using alcohol as a crutch eventually turns into dependence on alcohol. When we're using alcohol, we essentially train our brains to respond to stress, boredom, and discomfort by reaching for a drink. We actually create new neural pathways within our brain with addiction. Luckily, these new pathways are not permanent, and with continued sobriety, you could begin to rewire your brain to no longer rely on alcohol. Studies show that the brain is incredibly adaptive. According to research published in the Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment, within months of sustained sobriety, the brain starts developing new connections that support healthier coping mechanisms. You're retraining your brain to react to triggers in ways that actually serve your well-being. The best analogy I've heard about neuroplasticity is that it's like sledding down a hill covered in snow. If you take a sled down the same hill enough times, you'll begin to create grooves in the snow. Eventually, these grooves will become so deep that regardless of where you start at the top of the hill, you'll end up in one of these grooves, and that groove will guide you to a specific spot at the bottom of the hill. So when we use alcohol to cope with something like stress, we begin to create a new groove in our brain. I am stressed. I need a drink. I am stressed. I need a drink. I am stressed. I need a drink. After we go through that so many times, that groove becomes so deep that eventually we rewire our brains to not use our natural methods of dealing with stress. The second we become stressed, we are now heading down the path to the part of the brain that is affected by alcohol. And if we're not currently intoxicated, our brain freaks out, and that's when we crave a drink. Now, I'm not talking about the physical craving for alcohol you have when you're going through withdrawals. I'm talking about the kind that, if you don't do the work to relearn healthier coping mechanisms, that could pop up weeks, months, or even years after alcohol is gone from your system. Now, we can rewire our brains back, but here's the catch. You could only begin to rewire your brain if you first take alcohol out of the picture. Sobriety is like a storm that brings fresh snow to that mountainside we're sledding down in our analogy. The new snow will begin to fill those grooves, but only if we stop sledding down the ones we created with years of drinking. We have to stay sober long enough to fill in those previous grooves, and then we can begin to create new ones so that we don't end up in the same spot every time at the bottom of the mountain. When you remove alcohol from your life, you give your brain a chance to rebalance. People often notice that their baseline level of anxiety decreases and the depressive episodes become less frequent or severe. but it will be challenging initially. But with work, which I did through help from therapists, I was finally able to begin to address the root causes of various mental health challenges that I had and start discovering healthier methods of dealing with them. That doesn't mean that I don't get stressed, depressed, or anxious. Those are natural human emotions that cannot be avoided. It just means that I've learned healthier and more effective ways of dealing with those emotions when they surface. And once I began doing that, I started seeing all the mental health benefits that came from getting sober and being in a state where I could begin to heal. Sobriety is a fantastic opportunity to rebuild self-worth and self-esteem. Alcohol and drugs have a way of destroying these qualities because they often lead us to make choices that we regret or feel ashamed of. Once sober, we could address these feelings and begin to heal from our past mistakes. Alcohol dependency also often isolates us from the people who care about us the most. In sobriety, we gain the ability to connect more authentically with others. Many people notice their relationships improve as they become more present with the people who are most important in their lives. In sobriety, we learn to take control of our mental health proactively. This means developing healthier habits like regular exercising, practicing mindfulness, seeking therapy, and building a network of supportive people. These actions not only improve mental health, but create a new cycle of positive reinforcement that replaces the damaging cycle of alcohol dependence. So if you're sober or considering sobriety, remember that each day you're laying the foundation for better mental health. Every day you're choosing to see yourself more clearly, rewire your brain, and build authentic relationships that will support your growth. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a challenge. Take some time today to reflect on one area of your mental health that you'd like to improve or strengthen. Whether it's stress management, connecting with loved ones, or boosting your self-esteem, write down one action you could take to support that goal. It could be as simple as reaching out to someone you trust, finally making that first appointment with a therapist, starting a journal, or scheduling a few minutes for mindfulness. Whatever it is, take that first small step today. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you are, please do me a favor and grab your phone and text one person who you think might benefit from listening to this episode. That would mean the world to me. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening and keep living sober and happy.